Farmer versus Cartel. The story of Don Alejo. The story you are about to listen to is about a man who faced a battle no ordinary man could ever be prepared for. A battle where odds were stacked against him. A battle to defend all that he held dear. A fight to the death, and he did not back down. This is a David and Goliath story, only in this instance, David was a 77-year-old farmer, and Goliath was an incredibly dangerous cartel who took no prisoners. This man's name is Don Alejo, and he stared death in the face without a single iota of fear. Who was Don Alejo? The best way to describe Don Alejo is to say he is an honest man who decided that he was not going to delve into a life of crime, but make money and attain wealth the right way, through an honest living. And he worked hard enough to become one of the most successful men in Mexico, having his own ranch, employing hundreds of staff, and doing well for himself. Now, why was this a big deal? Well, because some parts of Mexico, especially where the cartels were prevalent, it was really difficult to make an honest living, and it seemed the only way to do it would be to plunge into a life of crime. But Don Alejo decided that would not be his life. He was born in 1933 near a small town called Allende Nuevo Leon, located in northeastern Mexico, a short distance away from the Texan border. Now, as we have mentioned earlier, he believed in doing honest work and working really hard. So, for years, Don Alejo, together with his brothers, worked as timber workers. He put in the time and efforts, worked diligently, and saved consistently because he knew that in time, he wanted to run his own business and not work for others all his life. Thankfully, his plan worked, as after a while, he began to save enough to buy a ranch. But buying ranches in Mexico was no fool's game, and he needed to strike a good bargain, which he did. Eventually, he was able to purchase a 200-hectare plot of land in Tamaulipas. But as great as this was, it wasn't time for him to celebrate yet, because when he purchased the land, it was nothing but a barren wasteland. But he sank in more money to be able to transform and reform it into a beautiful, functional ranch which he called San Jose, after his late father, Jose Garza. Living and working on his ranch, Don Alejo fell in love with some passions to which he honed and perfected. Among them was the love of nature and the love of farming. But even more importantly, Don Alejo loved to hunt, and with every single day that passed, he was getting better and better at it. As a matter of fact, he was known throughout for how amazingly accurate his shot was, even from a long distance. Don Alejo later got married to the love of his life, Letica, and together, the couple had 2 beautiful girls and lived peacefully and happily. But even in his paradise, there was trouble brewing around, trouble that would later find itself at his doorstep, trying to force its way in. The terror of the Mexican cartel.
Sinaloa and its capital city now under siege by drug cartels.
4 U.S. citizens have been kidnapped at gunpoint.
Asesinato del reconocido influencer Super Chinelo.
For the past few decades, Mexico was known for housing brutal cartels who only cared about killing and exploiting others. It was not safe with the cartel around, and they were by far the most powerful force in all of Mexico. But in the 2000s, things got even worse, because this was around the time of a drug war in Mexico between Los Zetas and their parent organization, the Gulf Cartel. Although no one knows for sure the reason for this drug war between the two organizations, especially seeing as they were once one body, but for the fact innocent men, women, and children suffered as a result. Again, around that time, the entire city of Tamaulipas was technically unsafe. The Los Zetas would often conduct robberies on motorists and kidnap people for steep ransom money. It was almost like the gang was looking for a way to raise money to buy ammunition and feed their members. But after a while, it appeared that wasn't enough for the cartel. They needed new ways to make money and exploit others, so they devised another evil plan to enrich themselves. They would approach business owners and farmers in the city and ask for a monthly payment so they could be protected. But this was funny, and a most devious form of exploitation because there was no danger at all except from the cartel. Therefore, the cartel was asking for monthly payments so they could protect these innocent people from the cartel themselves. It was a terrible arrangement, but these farmers and business owners had no choice but to oblige and indulge. Then, once again, the cartel took their evil plans even a step further by invading the lands and ranches of farmers around and evicting them forcefully, so they could turn the lands to the cartel's personal property and training camps. Again, the farmers had no choice. It was either they left their lands or died horrible deaths. They chose the former and obliged with their heads hung down in sadness. Don Alejo, on the other hand, was aware of all the atrocities done by the cartel and how there was no check on their violations and extremism. But he stayed on his ranch and minded his business. And, for some reason, the cartel never approached him or gave him any trouble. But sadly, all that changed on November 12, 2010. The beginning of something quite horrible was afoot. The encounter. For decades, the Los Zetas did not set foot on Don Alejo's ranch. But one day, he heard a knock on his door, and sadly, it was not the friendly kind. These were not his neighbors, and they were not here to check on him. They were at his door to do the same thing to him they had done to dozens of farmers in the city. They wanted to take his land. As soon as he opened the door, the members of the cartel told him who they were and told him that they were giving him 24 hours to pack up his stuff and leave the ranch so they can take ownership and possession of it. They informed him they were giving him this time so he could avoid embarrassment and any form of trouble and just leave peacefully. Usually, this whole thing worked when they told other farmers, but Don Alejo did the unthinkable. He stood his ground and told the cartel members that he wasn't going anywhere. This level of defiance annoyed the cartel so much that they decided to make their offer even more evil. They informed him that they were going to come back that night, and if he was still on the ranch, they would kill him. He was not going to just give up all that he had worked for all his life. The cartel simply reiterated they would be back that night. And when they returned, the property would be theirs, and they would kill any trespasser they came across, especially if it was him. With that, they got back into their vehicles and left. It was a hefty threat, and Don Alejo had a decision to make. If you were wondering why Alejo did not go to the police about this, it's because the cartel were basically the police. They were more armed, more powerful, and more dangerous than the police. When a cartel member is ever arrested, the rest of the cartel go to the station, and within minutes, the cartel member is released. Therefore, the Mexican police had no power over the cartel situation. To cap it all off, some of the policemen were already in the pockets of the cartel bosses and under their payroll. So going to the police was not an option. Alejo made a much bolder decision. He was going to fight the cartel single-handedly. Preparing for battle. Since he had made the decision to fight, Alejo knew one thing. He wanted to reduce the casualties as much as he could. He knew very well that he could ask his workers to arm up and fight, and most of them would. But what he did instead was a clear example of how kind-hearted Alejo was. He simply told his workers to pack up and go home to their families, almost like an early holiday. He did not tell them why he was sending them away, but they gratefully did as instructed. One of his closest friends knew what was going on and asked that he stay to fight with Alejo, but he refused and told his friend to go home. He had a plan. Soon the ranch was empty and Alejo was finally alone. It was time to kick his plan into full effect. As soon as he was alone, he called his wife and told her how much he loved her. Told her he would see her soon and he missed her. Then he went into a secret room in his house to reveal what he had been hiding for decades. Apparently, Don Alejo was no fool. He wasn't going to bask in the delusion that the cartel would never come for him all these years. So while he was working on his ranch, Alejo was also investing into weapons and to building a deadly arsenal. Now, after all these years, it was finally time to put all his guns into good use. He pulled out all his rifles and stationed them across all the windows in his house. Then he waited for the cartel to show up. The Rude Awakening. Don Alejo, a tough 77-year-old rancher, found himself facing down the menacing trucks and cars of a cartel one early morning. These cartel jerks thought they could just snatch away his hard-earned property. Little did they know, Don Alejo was no pushover. He was big into MMA, or as he jokingly called it, massive Mexican ass-kicking. As the cartel thugs rolled in at 4 a.m., honking horns, flashing bright lights, and spewing profanity, Don Alejo wasn't having any of it. Armed with his guns and a burning hatred for douchebags and drug dealers, he turned his home into a fortified fortress. The thugs began firing wildly, but Don Alejo, running from window to window like a one-man army, picked them off with deadly accuracy. In the initial clash, Don Alejo took out 4 of them. However, the cartel, undeterred, regrouped and advanced towards the house. 2 bold gangsters managed to get close, only to be greeted by Don Alejo, Scarface style. They couldn't break through the storm of bullets unleashed by the old man with the adamantium nerves. Realizing they couldn't match him face to face, the cartel cowards retreated to their trucks, returning with grenade launchers. The ensuing explosion-laden onslaught reduced everything within 50 yards to cinders in a matter of minutes. When the dust settled, Don Alejo's body was found amid the wreckage, still clutching his hunting rifles. The Mexican Marines arrived the next morning to a scene of both destruction and defiance. Don Alejo, a hero in his own right, had left a mark, taking down 4 drug dealers, leaving 2 thugs unconscious and sending wounded gangsters packing. Though Don Alejo's stand might not change the grim reality of rural Mexico, the man's bravery against overwhelming odds is nothing short of remarkable. He was laid to rest as a hero in Monterrey at the end of November. The aftermath. In the face of a siege orchestrated by the powerful Los Zetas cartel, many local media outlets hesitated to report on the unfolding events, intimidated by the cartel's formidable administrative influence. However, the Milenio newspaper broke the silence, courageously disseminating the story that soon gained traction across various Mexican social media platforms. The unfolding tale centered around a man named Don Alejo, who swiftly emerged as a symbol of resistance against organized crime. Despite the considerable media attention drawn to the events, the aftermath of Alejo's murder had been marked by a glaring absence of official investigations or charges filed against the Los Zetas cartel. The shadow of impunity hangs heavily over the perpetrators of this heinous act. Nonetheless, the memory of Don Alejo endures as a potent cultural icon. Numerous news outlets celebrate his legacy, portraying him as a figure who stood against adversity, embodying dignity, honor, and courage in the face of a formidable foe. The narrative surrounding Don Alejo not only highlights the shortcomings of the justice system, but also underscores the resilience and strength of individuals who dare to resist the oppressive forces of organized crime. As his story continues to echo through the cultural fabric of Mexico, Don Alejo stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of those who defy tyranny, even when justice remains elusive.